Hey everyone, welcome back to Prescription for Change Healthy on Purpose, the podcast where high performing women come to rewrite rules of health, success, and self care. I'm your host, and today's conversation is one that will change what you think you know about health, and more importantly, what you've been taught to believe about your body. So many women are out here achieving at the highest level, but still feel stuck, confused, or even ashamed when it comes to food, weight, and chronic health conditions. Today's guest is here to disrupt this narrative. Esther Tambe is a New York-based registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist who is leading a powerful movement in weight-inclusive, culturally responsive care. She specializes in eating disorders, diabetes, and helping women heal their relationships with food while managing their chronic conditions without shame. She's also a national speaker on weight bias in healthcare and the co-founder of Fight Through Flights, a nonprofit creating restorative healing experiences for Black women impacted by breast cancer. This conversation is not just about nutrition. It's about freedom, it's about truth, and it's about reclaiming your power. Let's get into it. Esther, thank you so much for joining today. Can you start by just giving a little bit more of how you got into this space and what you're doing right now?
Of course. Thank you for having me. So I've officially been a dietitian for 10 years, actually coming this August. And prior to getting into nutrition, I've always been interested in healthcare. So I was pre-med, I started off pre-med. And through that, eventually I thought about wanting to do bariatrics and actually becoming a bariatric surgeon, but no longer had any interest of that. When I realized what way could I give back on a one-to-one basis and also being able to provide compassionate care is kind of like where I went through the nutrition route. So I always didn't start off as a weight inclusive dietitian or working in the weight inclusive space. But the more that I continue to realize that I've always been about the why, that there was more to it than just weight, right? Like, understanding what was going on with someone. And that's kind of how I got into the space, or knowing that that's what weight inclusive work entailed. And I've just been really about how can we provide compassionate and respectful care, as there is a lot of stigma within healthcare, and being able to do it within the different specialties that I'm passionate about has just been something that I've been doing the last couple of years.
I love everything that you do, and I'm really excited for you to just share a little bit more of your knowledge and what you've been doing over the years, because this will, I'm sure, resonate with so many women right now. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. The first one I have for you is that so many high achieving women, particularly, feel like they're doing everything right, but still are struggling with food, weight, or their health in some way. What are we getting wrong about health, and what truth do we need to unlearn first?
I think the biggest thing is, kind of like, what are we getting wrong about health? How are we defining health, right? So for the most part, we've been equating thinness and health being, that's what it is. Whereas when we think about health, health is multidimensional, and we're not looking into, the emotional, the social, the physical parts of health and what that actually looks like too. But when we think about it, we're also not concerned the fact that not everyone has access to health and social determinants of health, what that may look like. So when we're trying to talk about preventing and managing disease, or our relationship with food and body, does everyone have the same access to actually have those tools to be one in good health? So I think it's understanding that health is multidimensional, but also everyone's definition of health can be different. For one, it might be being in a smaller size. For one, it might be free of disease. But for us to all think that health is the same, I think we're doing a disservice in that way too, because it's definitely very individualized, but we have to take into consideration that not everyone has the same access to health.
That's so important. And I really just wanted to highlight what you said about just understanding, first of all, that health is different for everyone. And health doesn't have to be this one thing. I think in general, we've been taught, even as children, that health looks like one thing or looks like this one person. And it really just depends on what you're going through in your life and what you have access to, just like you said. So that's really important. So the second question I have for you is that specializing in both eating disorders and diabetes are two areas that are often treated very differently. How did these conditions intersect, and what's missing in the way that we're currently treating them?
So there's so many things in it. So I guess I would say, for the most part, when we talk about or looking into diabetes, right, it's most of the language that has been historically known with diabetes. It comes in a restrictive language, a shame-based language. So sometimes the overfixation of making sure our numbers numbers are within range, or wanting to be the best type of person with diabetes, or wanting to make sure we are quote unquote compliant, can lead to extreme behaviors and disordered eating that can lead into a certain way. So seeing that intersection of how that happens sometimes with eating disorders, I feel there's so much to eating disorders that it's not being looked at. So we think of just in general, eating disorders in communities of color is not something we see all the time. So a lot of times Black women are getting mislooked, misdiagnosed because, the lack of representation when it comes to the eating disorder space. So it just happens to be two things I've been passionate about and enjoy working with. But for both, they often get misdiagnosed, mislooked, but there are the intersections when we think about the language and the representation that comes with it.
And that's so important to know too, because I think when we hear those two conditions, eating disorders and diabetes, first understanding that each one has a whole like spectrum to it. It's not
Right,
one particular thing and they can look different. So depending on which eating disorder you're treating or what type of diabetes you're treating, and different, types of diabetes affect different parts of your body and how you are able to function and what you need to do. So it's so important to be able to know that and understanding our health in that way.
right, exactly.
And then with this, both of these things often come with stigma. So, with what you're dealing with and being a dietitian, especially focusing on eating disorders and diabetes, how do you feel that the stigma is embedded in healthcare and what does that actually look like in real patient experiences? So, how does it impact outcomes, especially for Black women?
I'll talk about diabetes first when it comes to stigma in general with healthcare, right? So a lot of times, even just mainstream media, and we only hear about diabetes, but we don't hear about the different types of diabetes, right? So it's usually it's dependent upon type 1, type 2, whatever the case may be. If you have type 2, you're at fault. That's a diabetes that you cause. It's not something that you didn't have control over. If you have type 2 diabetes, it's because you're in a larger body. The way you ate is the reason why you have, where that's not the case, right? There's so many things that are the causes of diabetes, but you being in a larger body did not cause you to have diabetes. And, sometimes just in general, that stigma is what's going to cause for delay in actually seeing a doctor, right? The delay in actually following treatment. So if you feel that you're being judged the minute you go into an appointment, you're just not going to go. But this
Right.
delay in treatment, it's not just diabetes, this could be anything. So we're now not going to the doctor because of the fear of being judged on how we look like, and we now miss potentially, our mammograms or a pap smear or anything of that sort. We are not, in that case, being preventative, right? So
Mm.
that's what a lot of stigma looks like when just thinking about diabetes stigma, weight stigma, but also in a sense of, in the eating disorder space too, kind of like what I mentioned about earlier. As Black women, the representation when it comes to an eating disorder is not a Black woman. We usually see a thin, white, affluent woman, right? So right there and then, whether it be you not believing that you may have some type of disordered eating, or a provider thinking that no, you don't fit the eating disorder criteria, or you only fit for this type of eating disorder, not another one because you're not thin, you're not this way. So that's where stigma starts to
Mhm.
come in. And it's just realizing that the stigma is not treating anything, right? Like it's causing more barriers, it's causing more harm, but this is what a lot of us are thinking, or a lot of people are thinking, and that's just doing more harm.
And just provided so many nuggets there. The first thing I wanted to just kind of highlight is that the stigma is both ways, right? For the person, the patient, or the person who's dealing with this disease, and then for going in to see your provider, whether that's a physician, nurse practitioner, or PA, is that thought of what these things actually look like and whether or not you fit that particular molds that we've been taught. And the interesting piece of that too is that type 2 diabetes is actually hereditary. So that's the one that usually is associated with you as the patient caused this when that's not the case at all. And so I want to thank you for, bringing that to our attention as well, because it's so important for people to know. And really, I just want the audience to realize that if this is something that you're dealing with, that it is critical to be able to go and seek attention from your provider sooner than later.
Right. And like which what you just said with type 2, right? Parts of it hereditary, but also, age is one of the risk factors for type 2. As you get older. So age 45 and older puts you at risk for type 2. So are we saying that we're not going to age, right? Like we technically
Mhm.
don't have any control of our aging unless we die
Right.
before 45, then we are decreasing our risk. But as long as we get older and get above 45, we are at risk for type 2
Mhm.
diabetes. Doesn't matter what your size is, doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. As long as you are aging, you're at risk for type 2. Let's talk about
Absolutely.
that type of stuff, but let's not just blame it on body size, what you ate,
Mhm.
because those
Mhm.
two things have nothing to do with body size and what you ate.
Absolutely. And then for women who are trying to balance ambitious careers, family, and their health, what does a weight inclusive, sustainable approach to nutrition actually look like in real life?
In that case would be understanding that this is more than just the numbers, right? So yes, you may see the scale, that's one number, but it's not about that physical part of it. As you're dealing with all these things and there's going to be hormones, there's going to be stress levels. These are things that also impact our health, right? The increase of stress is also the increase of disease. That also, increases prognosis with certain stuff. So it's not just about I need to lose 20 pounds to be in the best shape or health status, right? Because you
Mhm.
could still lose 20 pounds and still have high blood pressure, right? You
Right.
could still be stressed. So when we're not dealing with all this, what we would say like environmental type stuff or trying to understand what's going on within ourselves, we won't know. But it doesn't mean we now necessarily need to hop on that fad diet, extreme dieting behaviors, and that's going to make us now be the best, family woman, the best wife, the best mother. Like we need to also consider our stress levels, what else is going on. So thinking a little bit more than just the number on that scale.
Mm, mhm. And those are the what I call the non-scale victories, right? So just
Right,
not
right.
focusing on the number on the scale, just like you said. Are there some kind of simple nutrition tips that you would have for just getting started?
Yeah, I essentially I think getting started depending on looking at what you're already doing, right? So we have maybe some of the high achievers that they're unrushed. We skip breakfast.
Mm,
So even just skipping that breakfast makes a difference. Like we want to try to eat when we are waking up within 1 to 2 hours of waking up, right? Sometimes we may be too busy in the day that we're not hydrating enough or we're only drinking coffee. So can we think about hydration, right? So
mhm,
these are little steps that we can make. Are we sleeping enough? As much as we want to pull the all-nighters and get all that work done, if we're not sleeping, our cortisol levels will increase, right? So these are
mhm,
things that we can do that have nothing to do necessarily physically diet-wise, but these are things that aren't necessarily only just about food, but thinking about, are we eating breakfast in the morning? Coffee and tea is not breakfast. So are we having an actual meal? Are we staying hydrated? And then, moving from there, but kind of seeing like, what are we already doing? Are we going 6 to 8 hours without food? Is there room to put in that snack? How, may that look like consistently based on a busy schedule? But I
mhm,
think just starting off with like what makes the most sense, the not skipping the breakfast, if we can add that in, and then going from there. But again, everyone will be individualized. So for each person, that may look different. What would be the
mhm.
first they add into their life?
And those are some really simple things that we can do. It really is not that hard. I think sometimes we just get in our own head or get in our own
Right,
way.
right.
Sleep, like you said, I think is one of those things, health tips that are so underlooked. And we don't really think about the connection between sleep and eating or lack of sleep and eating and how we eat. If I stay up late enough, I'm looking for another snack when I really should be sleeping. And that's just going to increase your stress hormones, like you said, cortisol levels going up. And that doesn't help with your glucose either. So those like spikes and waves. So I think it's just really important to look at those other aspects that can affect our health. All right. And then why is culture such a critical part of healing our relationship with food? And how can women start honoring that without guilt?
I would say culture is what makes us who we are, right? And I think everyone's culture is very different, very individual. Like we don't need to erase our culture to quote unquote have better health. There's still ways that we can have our cultural foods, continue our cultural practices and still be in good health. So I think, one identifies with their culture or what they grew up on. It doesn't mean that we have to stop it entirely in order to have good health. Also, when you are seeking health from other providers, you do want to also make sure that they are culturally competent, they are culturally sensitive, and they're not, telling you don't eat rice and beans anymore, don't eat your legumes, don't eat your lentils, don't eat that, or don't do this, whereas that might be what you grew up on. But how can I have it? Like we should be having these conversations on how can we still add in my culture to my lifestyle?
Mm-hmm. And not taking that away. That's so important too, because I don't know. I feel very connected to having Caribbean roots myself. Is just I eat, especially on Sundays, with my kids, I'm cooking meals that I grew up on and wanting them to understand like those recipes and be able to reproduce those things and enjoy and like partake in the culture. It's a very important part of who we are. And I feel like if you can't do those things or you're told you can't do those things, then it really just makes for a very difficult transition to the health that you want to reach, right? Think
Yeah.
just meeting people where they are and trying to figure out ways that you can still incorporate the foods that you love and get your health back.
Yeah. And the question is when you're being told you can't, you can always ask why not? Like
Right.
why is this
Mhm.
culture? Because when we think about Caribbean cultures or African cultures, so I am African, right? Most of our foods are protein, fiber,
Mhm. Mhm.
vegetables, or these are all things that we need. So why can we not have them?
Right. Right.
So I think the conversation needs to have, but again, as we get older and we realize our identity and realize our roots and stuff, like you want that when you're older to understand where did you come from or understand how can I make a dish from my culture the right way, right? Like we don't need to keto-fy jollof rice, right? We don't need to, healthify, ackee and saltfish. Like we don't need to healthify
Mhm.
it. That is one's culture, right? So keep it that way. There's still
Right.
that one dish is not going to impact you and provide disease, right? So there's still other ways of other things that you could do to better your health without erasing the culture.
Mhm, mhm. That's so important, and that's actually tied back to one of the earlier questions about stigma and how that affects us, right? Thinking that certain cultures in general are just labeled as unhealthy or their food is
Right.
unhealthy and not providing what we need, when it's actually the opposite. A lot of the food is homegrown and where it's coming from and, using the resources and produce that we have on hand. All right. So I have enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to ask you one last question just so that you can give to our audience. And what I always ask at the end is if you could give one prescription to our audience of high achieving women trying to get healthier, what would your prescription be?
I would say go get your lab work done. And I say it in the sense of why, because I see a lot of time, what vitamin should I take or what are you guys saying? You won't know until you know those numbers. The lab work
Mm,
right? That is your blood work, everything's in right. So what the next person did versus what you did may not work, but you won't know until you know your numbers and how to go from that. So book that appointment, right? Book that appointment to get your physical done, the lab work done, see a dietitian, that's covered by insurance. And,
mm,
a lot of us are doing work virtually, but first know before we start crowdsourcing all the remedies and all the things because of the fads, know exactly what's going on with you because you also don't want to take something when you didn't need it, just as there is a thing of overdoing it. We don't need to always over
right.
having it is enough, right? So unless there's a deficiency in something, you don't need to take that extra vitamin because it's the thing right now where we're trying to boost.
Mhm.
So just knowing your numbers, get that blood work, and you're your best self advocate.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Getting your actual numbers because that's where we're going to be able to make those changes. Everyone, whatever's trending, take this, take that. You don't know exactly what you have and what you don't have or what you're deficient in. So, love it. Before we go, can you just let our audience know where we can find you either on social media or website if they want to connect with you? How would we find you?
Yeah. On social media, I'm on Instagram at et.the.rd and through my website, esthertambenutrition.com.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. If this conversation challenged you even just a little bit, that is the point because real changes don't happen in comfort, it happens in awareness. Today, Esther reminded us that health is not about shrinking yourself, but it's about understanding yourself more. It's about removing shame, rejecting outdated narratives, and choosing care that actually sees you. So if you've been measuring your worth by numbers on a scale, or in your minds, this is your reminder you're not a number. You're a whole human being deserving of care that honors your body, your culture, and your lived experience. If this episode resonated with you, share it with another woman who needs to hear this message. I'm sure there are many who do. And make sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay healthy on purpose and cheers to your health.